Hey there, I'm Bailey and welcome to my channel where we discuss all the tips and tricks necessary for you to live a life of adventure. Today's video is all about lightning safety. So if you have ever hiked somewhere like the high Rockies in the summer, then you know that thunderstorms are pretty common, especially when you're above tree line in an exposed area. So this is going to be geared towards how to keep you safe. So you've gotten caught in a storm or you see a storm coming on and you're wondering, what should I do? These are going to be all the tips to help you out. So we're going to talk about when is it too late to bail? Where should you hide? If you are caught in an exposed area, what steps should you take to stay safe? As well as what you can do if you do get struck or someone in your group gets struck by lightning, as well as some extra tips and resources that I'm going to be giving you guys that you can check out on your own. So be sure to stay tuned until the end so that way you can get all of these awesome tips. However, I do want to say before we jump in that if you are interested in seeing more tips and tricks all about hiking and backpacking, especially if you do so with your dogs, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I release new videos every week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So my first tip is probably gonna make some of you a little mad, and that is really just to avoid lightning. That is the best way to stay safe, is to just not get caught somewhere that's really exposed, like above tree line or out in the open during a thunderstorm. And now that's not always possible, but there's a lot of things you can do, like learning how to read the clouds, and that is a topic that I covered in one of my last videos, and you can check that out here if you haven't already, as well as just trying to get out of those areas by noon. Now I know that's not always possible, especially if you are a long distance hiker and you have to make sure to keep moving to, keep putting those miles in. Sometimes you might get caught unawares, as well as if you're hiking in some place like the Great Basin in Wyoming, where it's just very open and a little bit hilly, but there's not really any trees because it's the plains essentially, then it might be kind of hard to avoid thunder. So we're gonna go through some of your tips, but I do want to remind you that even though lightning is pretty scary, it really is not that common to have injuries and even fatalities due to lightning strikes. There have only been 13 deaths, I believe, in the last couple years. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what that number was. I forget now. But I will link the information to the weather.gov Colorado lightning strike facts. That way you can check that out if you want to see more information about how many fatalities there actually are and how many people actually get injured, because there really isn't that many. So as long as you're smart and play it safe, I've heard of and in fact met many people that have been caught in thunderstorms above tree line, and they have all live to tell the tale. So it's not super common. You just want to make sure to follow the steps that I'm going to talk about today to keep you safe in case you do end up in a thunderstorm above tree line. Okay, so the first thing I really want to talk about as far as actual advice is the safest to the least safest places to hide out if you are out hiking or backpacking during a thunderstorm. So let's start with the least safest place. So the one place that you do not want to be, if you can avoid it at all, do not be there, would be on the top of a peak. So this is the least safe for a reason, and that is because if you are standing on top of a tall peak, especially like a 14er, you are now the tallest thing within a large radius. Even in the San Juans, where there are a bazillion 13ers and 14ers, by standing on top of one of those, you have just made yourself the primary target to get struck by lightning. So even, if you're peak bagging, you're going over a tall peak, try to move off of that peak if you can and get to a safer place. Even if you can't get to one of the safest places, at least try to get off the peak if it is all safe for you to do so. Which leads me to the second least safest place, and that would probably be on a ridge, especially if it's on a ridge high above tree line. You are still in a very exposed location. There's not really a lot around you except probably some rocks, and so you are still have a pretty high likelihood of getting struck because you stand out compared to everything else. So I try to avoid ridges, even if I'm below tree line. If I have a choice, I try to stay off of ridges if I can. So another place that really is not safe is under any sort of overhang or in a cave, anything like that, especially if it's above tree line. Definitely avoid those, but below tree line too, try not to be in a cave or something. And the reason why is because rocks can conduct lightning. So if you are trying to hide under a boulder or an overhang above tree line and the lightning strikes that rock, it can go through the rock and still strike you. And so that would be, really unfortunate, right? So don't go into any overhangs. And This for sure is true, especially if there's like metal around as well. So right before I went and hiked the Colorado Trail, I was sitting at home and my dad was watching the show I Am Still Alive, which is basically like all these stories, like firsthand accounts of people that got very close to death, either because they were the victim of violent crime or some of them were attacked by animals. Some of them were like out in the elements, right? So they had something happened to them out in the woods, that kind of thing. So all kinds of different stories. But one of the stories, and the one that was on that episode right before I left, was the story of two guys that were climbing Mount Whitney together. And if you have ever been on Whitney, I haven't, but if you've ever seen pictures of Whitney or know anything about it, you know that there's a hut up there. And so a storm came in at like 2 in the afternoon. And these two gentlemen went inside the hut and with a whole another crowd of people, like there's a whole bunch of people in there. And the lightning hit this metal spout, I'm assuming it was from like an old fireplace, and conducted through and struck 2 or 3 different people inside that hut. So going inside something like that under a rock overhang, especially if there's any metal involved, just is not a smart idea either. You're honestly almost better out in the open than you are under an overhang like that. So do keep that in mind. Along with those like rocky overhangs and caves and such, another one that really is not smart, you know, you're not going to find this on a peak, but I would not sit next to it, would be any sort of body of water. So like a lake, a pond, anything like that. I would try to get some distance away for the obvious reason that water conducts lightning. So even though it doesn't necessarily attract the lightning to you, it's not more likely to strike a pond. But if you are next to it, if it is struck, especially if you're wet, then it can bring that lightning into your body and make it much worse for you. So do try to avoid those places. Another thing to avoid is if there are trees, but they're very sparse, do not pick the one tree that is standing by itself and stand under it, because that thing is very tall compared to everything around it, which means that it's more likely to be struck, which means that it's more likely for you to get struck standing underneath it. However, one of the safest places you can be is within a group of trees. So if you are hiking, especially like in Colorado or the Sierras or something, if you can get below tree line to where there's enough trees that there's like lots of objects, then you can kind of hunker down and wait out the storm, and your chances of getting struck are very unlikely. I will say as well that if you are above tree line and you can't get down, then the kind of safest place you can be above tree line is if there's any sort of like depression, you know, if you can kind of get in a place that's less exposed. So you'll see that even though you're in the plains or something, like on the Great Basin, out in eastern Colorado, out, you know, some places like Snow Mesa in the San Juans, even though it's very flat and open, there's still rolling hills and such, and you can kind of get down in a dell as long as there's not water collecting down there. If you can kind of get down one of those areas, you're just much less exposed to the elements. And that's kind of, you can see, I did camp in Snow Mesa this last summer. Even though there weren't any storms, I still did kind of pick a campsite that was a little bit further down in a dell, where I was just a little bit less exposed to the elements and to the wind too, which is nice. So those are kind of like how I would pick places to ride out a storm. So best case scenario, you're below tree line. If there's no way for you to get below tree line, or you're in a place that's just naturally very open, then try to pick a place that's a little bit less exposed, because it's kind of like lower, like a depression in the ground or something like that. Okay, so now let's say that you are hiking along and you see a storm coming in and you're wondering, what should I do? Like, what decision do you make? So let's kind of go through, if you see a storm coming in, what you should do, or then we're going to talk about if you get caught and you decide you have to stay above tree line, what you should do. And then the last thing we'll talk about is how to care for someone that has been struck by lightning. So you're hiking, you are watching the clouds, just like you've learned in my other video, and you see that a storm is coming in. This is really the best time to bail, is before you start hearing lots of lightning. You know, either you want to turn around, or if you see a place just ahead of you, then I would go down. I would not do what I did on the Collegiate West in 2018 and keep hiking. I would try to bail if you can. That's the safest option. And honestly, when I'm hiking, I am always kind of keeping my eye open for a bailout point, especially if you are on your way in. So you're doing like an out and back, like a 14er, and you're on your way up. Look for bailout points. If you're doing a through hike as you're going along, look for bailout points. That way, if you get caught in a storm or you see something building, you can say, oh, you know, I know if I just turn back half a mile, I can go down, or I see down that ridge I can descend and then go down into the trees. Most places, it really is pretty safe. You know, things are usually open, right? So you can see where you can go down and get below tree line. That's not always an option, and you do have to be careful. So like, if you are doing something like where you're bagging Red Cloud and Sunshine Peak, you have to go over Red Cloud Peak to get to Sunshine Peak. So that means when you go back, you have to reascend Red Cloud, which is a 14er, right? And there's not really any good bailout options. Like, you could try to bail, but it would be such a long hike off trail and honestly not very safe. They have signs up recommending that you don't go off trail, that you need to kind of keep that in mind when you're hiking. Is if you get to Red Cloud and you see a lot of storms around you, you want to be thinking, you know, is it really safe for me to go to try to get sunshine today? Or should I, you know, am I going to be able to get there and get back and get below tree line in time to dodge this storm? Or am I going to be putting myself at risk? So you want to kind of keep that in mind as you're going. Keep your options open, look around you, pay attention. Don't just zoom out and be in La La Land. So it's very important to, you know, be aware of your surroundings and watching what's going on around you. I mean, obviously, you know, and the main thing too is to be safe. If there's cliffs and you're going to cliff out, or you are in not a good spot to bail, if you're doing something like, you know, like big boy, big pants mountaineering, like class 3 or class 4 or something where it's hard to get down, then of course be safe and take the precautions that we're about to talk about. So what are those precautions? You've decided you're above tree line, you don't have time to bail, maybe you hear a lot of really loud lightning, you know, it's your hair is standing up, it's all staticky, and you don't think you can get down in time. Then what you want to do is to start going through this list of precautions. So the first thing you want to do is you want to get rid of all of your stuff. So if you have your backpack on, you want to take it off. I mean, you could throw it if you want. I'd probably just set it down and walk a little bit away from it. If you have anything metal on your person, leave it with your pack, or, you know, get rid of it so it's not on you. And the reason, again, is not because it's going to attract lightning. So just like with water, if you have metal on you, it's not going to make you more likely to be struck. But the problem is, if you do get struck, it's just going to conduct much better. So, or if like it strikes the ground near you, it will conduct it to you. So get rid of anything that's metal. Try to get everything away from you. If you are hiking with a group of other people, you also want to make sure to spread out from them as well. And this is assuming, you know, you've tried to get into a safe location, so try to come off a peak, spread out, spread your gear out. And the reason why is because if one of you gets struck, you want to try to be far apart so that hopefully only one person gets hit and not the whole group. That way, if only one person gets hit, then there's other people there to help care for you or care for that person and make sure that there's someone to give them first aid. Obviously, if you're hiking by yourself, then this doesn't matter and you just gotta kind of hope and pray. But yeah, if you're with other people, try to spread out. That way, the whole group is not gonna get struck at the same time. So then kind of the third main thing you want to do is to crouch down. So hopefully you are wearing shoes. And the reason I say that is because your shoes, most shoes have rubber on the bottom, right? So that is an insulator. So if the ground gets struck, it won't come up your feet. So you want to stand on the balls of your feet and to crouch down into a small ball with only your feet touching the ground. So that just makes you less likely to get struck because you're just making yourself as compact as possible. You're less of a target, and then hopefully nothing will conduct up through the ground. They also say to cover your ears with your hands, and that makes sense just because it's very loud, and to kind of, you know, put your head in between your knees kind of thing and just crouch down and try to hold that, and then basically pray for your life. I do want to talk briefly about dogs. I haven't really seen a lot of information about this out there, and so I really want to share this because a lot of people enjoy peak bagging and doing a lot of hiking with their dogs, and I definitely enjoy hiking above tree line with my dogs, and it's something that has always kind of made me a little bit nervous. I will say, for one, that I'm a little bit more conservative when I hike with my dogs. I try not to put myself at as much risk to getting struck by lightning when I'm hiking with my dogs, but just in case you were to get stuck in a thunderstorm and you had your dogs with you, this is what I would personally try to do. So the first thing would be to take off their collars. So hopefully you have, you know, like some sort of collar on them, which means that there's probably some sort of metal on them. So just like you got rid of your own metal, the first thing I would do would be to take off their collars or anything else that might have metal on it and throw it away. The second thing would be that if you have a small dog, so like Skittles only weighs 10 pounds, I would pick them up and hold them in your lap when you're curling up into a small ball. That way they're not touching the ground and they're kind of protected. I mean, obviously if you both get struck, you're both going to be kind of up a creek. So, you know, good luck. And same with, I guess, like medium-sized dogs. If you have a large-sized dog like Prima, if you have anything that's insulating, so I usually hike with my Z-Lite pad, that's a little bit insulating, right? It's better than nothing. I would lay that like on the ground, tell my dog to, you know, take a lie down command on it and try to get some distance. That way, if, you know, the dog got struck, hopefully you can go help them. It depends. You know, some dogs might be a little bit too freaked to stay on the pad if you get distance from them. And so in that case, I would, you know, maybe stay next to them and put a hand on them to try to keep them calm. But if you can, give them a lie down command and get some distance. That way you are separate, and the event your dog gets struck, you can try to help give them some CPR and first aid. So now, what should you do if someone is struck? So obviously if you're hiking solo and you get struck, you can kind of do some of this, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging. If you're with a group or you find someone that's been struck, then you'll want to go through this list and just modify it if you are on your own and you are able to retain consciousness or become conscious after the fact. So the first thing you should do is, if anybody has been struck, is to call for help. So hopefully you have some sort of personal locator beacon that you can hit the SOS button. If not, if there's someone available that can try to go down and get a cell signal, that would be prime, is to try to find some way to call in for help so those people can get out safely. The second thing would be to get out of danger. Most likely, if you just got struck by lightning, there's still a storm going on. It's not just going to magically, you know, disappear. It's like, you know, it's not going to be like a one and done deal. So you want to try to get down and out of danger. So try to move that person, as long as they don't have any major bone breaks or any sort of major bleeding, which is, both of those things are pretty uncommon with lightning strikes, then it's okay to move them. So try to move out of danger, even if you can just get into a less exposed location. That is ideal. The third kind of thing is, if anybody's unconscious, you want to tend to them first, because those are going to be people that were affected the worst. If they have obvious injuries but they're conscious, then do them next, and then people with the least minor injuries last. Once you've kind of decided who to treat first, you've moved to safety, then you will want to check pulses and breathing. So especially if it's someone that's unconscious, you know, make sure that they have a pulse in their breathing. And if they don't have either of those things or missing one or the other, then perform CPR. And so it is a good idea, if you have not already taken some sort of wilderness first aid class or other first aid type class, you know, it's always a good idea to do that kind of thing. So I would recommend doing that before you get out there. That way you are not wishing you had when you get in that situation. And then once you've done that, everyone has a pulse and they're breathing and they're doing okay. That way, then you can go ahead and tend to some of those minor injuries using your wilderness first aid knowledge along with your first aid kit, which I do want to remind you that should be in your 10 essentials that you should carry with you on every hike. And if you would like a reminder of what the 10 essentials are, then I will link that video up here as well as down in the description. So that's really about it. I mean, that is pretty uncommon for that to happen. I will say I actually have met someone that's been struck by lightning. When I was hiking in Canada, I met someone at a hostel in Golden, British Columbia, that had been out climbing with two other guys and got struck. And then he was trying to hide it from his brother because he was actually supposed to wait for his brother to go do that climb. But yes, they were all next to each other and one got struck the worst, and it traveled through the three of them. And the guy that I met on the end, he did get zapped, but not nearly as bad as his friends. So it is important to take these precautions and pay attention to what's going on around you. That way you can try to stay safe. I wouldn't let it stop you. I wouldn't worry about it too much, but it's always good to be prepared and to know what to do, right? That way if something does happen, you're not panicked and you know how to keep yourself safe in those situations, which obviously you're doing since you're watching this video. So good for you. So that's all I have. Do you have any fun lightning stories? You know, if you do, be sure to let me know in the comments. But otherwise, if you have enjoyed this video, be sure to smash the like button. And otherwise, I will see you guys next week. And until then, have some happy trails.